"Bring him to me," ordered the Alpha Queen, when she saw the young steward dancing in the hall. "Bring him to me." 3 words that would damn us both, though I had no way of knowing it then, watching him move across my throne room, like sin wrapped in servant's clothing. The weight of my crown had never felt heavier than it did that night, the silver circlet pressing against my temples, until I could feel my pulse hammering beneath the metal. Around me, the annual celebration roared with life. 300 nobles packed into Castle Blood Moon's great hall, their laughter echoing off vaulted ceilings that had witnessed 5 generations of my family's rule. The orchestra played something complex and forgettable, strings weaving through the thick air that smelled of roasted venison, spiced wine, and the particular musk that comes from too many wolf shifters confined in stone walls. My silk gown clung to my skin beneath the heavy velvet of my royal mantle, and I could feel sweat beginning to bead at the small of my back, despite the February cold that crept through the ancient windows. I was 29 years old, Alpha Queen of the Blood Moon Pack, ruler of these Belgian territories for 7 years since my father's death, and I had never felt more alone than I did surrounded by people pretending to love me. Every smile in that room was calculated. Every toast raised in my honor came with an agenda attached. Lady Constance wanted her son appointed to the council. Duke Aldrich wanted tax relief for his lands. Even Father Benedict, who'd baptized me as an infant, approached earlier with concerns about my unmarried state, his words dripping with the kind of pious judgment that makes you want to shift forms and bite something. They all wanted something from me, and I gave and gave until I felt hollow as a bell, ringing with duty but empty of music. That's when he appeared. I noticed him because he didn't belong. This tall figure moving through the servants' entrance with a grace that seemed wrong for someone carrying a wine pitcher. The other servants scurried and hunched, making themselves small as mice, but this one walked like he owned the floor beneath his feet. My wolf stirred inside me, pressing against my ribs like she wanted to tear through flesh and claim him right there on the marble floor, and I pressed one hand against my chest, feeling my heartbeat spike beneath my palm. He wore the simple black and silver livery of castle staff, but the clothes fit him differently than they did the others. His shoulders were too broad, his posture too straight, and when he set down the wine pitcher and moved instead toward the grand piano in the corner, every predatory instinct I possessed locked onto him like a crossbow finding its target. The orchestra was still playing when he sat down at the piano bench, but something in the air shifted. A hush rippled outward from where he sat, conversation dying in concentric circles as his fingers found the keys. The sound that emerged made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't the careful, correct music that usually filled these halls. It was something wild and ancient, a melody that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and sink straight into my bones. I could feel it in my teeth, in the marrow of my spine, in the place where my human consciousness ended and my wolf began. The music wrapped around me like invisible hands, and I realized with a shock of recognition that tasted like copper on my tongue that there was magic in it, subtle enough that the humans in the room wouldn't notice. But my wolf knew. She could taste the power in the air, feel it calling to something primal and desperate inside us both. He played for perhaps 3 minutes, but it felt like falling through time itself. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. And then the applause began. Polite at first, but building to something genuine, something odd. And I watched his face as he stood and bowed with a grace that spoke of training no servant should possess. That's when his eyes found mine. Blue. The kind of blue that makes you think of deep water and drowning. His gaze locked with mine across 50 feet of crowded room, and I felt the impact like a fist to my solar plexus. My wolf howled inside my skull, a sound of recognition and hunger that made my hands tremble where they gripped the arms of my throne. I could smell him suddenly, impossibly, despite the distance and the crowd between us, pine needles and old books and something darker, something that reminded me of the forest floor after rain, of earth and secrets, and things that grew in shadows. "Mate," my wolf whispered, and the word echoed through my entire being like a prophecy. "Mate, mate, mate." I opened my mouth, and the words fell out before I could stop them, my voice cutting through the applause like a blade through silk. "Bring him to me." The silence that followed was different this time. Shocked. Scandalized. I heard Lady Constance gasp, saw Duke Aldrich's eyebrows climb toward his receding hairline. Father Benedict made a small sound of dismay. Protocol dictated that a queen did not acknowledge servants, did not address them directly. certainly did not command them brought before her throne like she was summoning a courtier. But I was Alpha, and my word was law, and something in me needed him closer with an urgency that felt like starvation. The servants nearest to him stepped back as if he'd caught fire. He stood there for a heartbeat longer, those impossible blue eyes still locked on mine, and I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, yes, but also conflict, pain, fear, maybe, or something very like it. Then he moved, weaving through the crowd with that same liquid grace, and every eye in the room tracked his progress toward my dais. The closer he came, the stronger the scent grew, until my mouth was watering and my wolf was clawing at my insides, demanding I shift, demanding I claim, demanding something I couldn't name and couldn't resist. He stopped at the base of the 3 marble steps that led up to my throne and dropped to one knee with a fluidity that spoke of practice. His head bowed, revealing the strong column of his neck, and I wanted to bite him there so badly my jaw ached with it. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was like his music, rich and dark and full of hidden depths. There was something wrong about it, something that didn't quite match his servant's clothing, an education in those 2 words that raised questions I didn't know how to ask. "You play beautifully," I heard myself say, and my own voice sounded strange to my ears, breathless and young in a way that made me ashamed. I was a queen. I'd led armies. I'd negotiated treaties. I'd executed traitors with my own claws. But this man, this servant, reduced me to a girl with a flush climbing up her neck. "What is your name?" "Felix Ashford, Your Majesty." He raised his eyes to mine, and the impact of that blue gaze nearly knocked me backward in my seat. "I've only been in your service for 3 days. I hope I didn't overstep by playing tonight." 3 days. He'd been under my roof for 3 days, and I hadn't known, hadn't sensed him, hadn't felt this pull until now. How was that possible? How could I have missed this, missed him, when every cell in my body was screaming that he was mine? "You didn't overstep," I said, aware that the entire court was watching, listening, dissecting every word for gossip and ammunition. "Your talents are wasted in the servants' quarters. I would speak with you further about your music, privately, in my study, within the hour." Another collective gasp, more scandalous glances exchanged. I could already hear the rumors forming, could imagine the whispers that would spread through castle and town by morning. The Alpha Queen summoning a male servant to her private chambers. Alone, at night. They would call me bewitched. They would say he'd used magic to ensnare me. They wouldn't be entirely wrong. Felix's face remained carefully neutral, but I saw his throat work as he swallowed. "As you command, Your Majesty." "You may go," I said, and he rose with that same impossible grace and backed away 3 steps before turning, as protocol demanded. I watched him disappear through the servants' door, and it took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to follow him immediately, to maintain my seat, to continue smiling and nodding at the nobles who approached with transparent attempts to discover what that had been about. The hour that followed was torture. I went through the motions of queenship, accepting congratulations on another successful year, listening to petitions I'd hear formally in the morning, dancing with Duke Aldrich's insufferably boring nephew because political necessity demanded it. But my mind was elsewhere, my body humming with an energy I couldn't contain. My wolf paced restlessly beneath my skin, and the crescent moon birthmark on my right shoulder burned like someone had pressed a brand there. When I finally excused myself, citing exhaustion, the relief was physical. I climbed the stairs to my private wing with my heart hammering so hard I could hear blood rushing in my ears. My study waited at the end of a long gallery lined with portraits of my ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to judge me as I passed. My father's portrait hung last, and I couldn't meet his gaze. He'd always told me that an Alpha Queen's duty was to her pack first. Her heart never. He'd married for alliance, produced an heir out of obligation, and died without ever knowing what it felt like to choose something for himself. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. Felix was already waiting when I entered, standing by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette dark against the moonlight streaming through the glass. He turned as I closed the door, and I heard the lock click with a finality that made my breath catch. We were alone, truly alone. No witnesses, no protocol, just a woman and a man and the impossible pull between us. "You wanted to speak with me, Your Majesty?" His voice was carefully respectful, but I could hear the strain in it, the same tension that was making my hands shake. "Freya," I said, surprising myself. When we're alone, you'll call me Freya. Something flickered in his eyes, too quick for me to read. That wouldn't be appropriate. I don't care about appropriate. I moved toward him, drawn like iron to a lodestone, until I stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. This close, the scent of him was overwhelming, and my wolf was practically purring with satisfaction. Tell me about yourself, Felix Ashford. Where did you learn to play like that? Where are you from? He looked down at me, and I realized he was taller than I'd thought, at least 6 inches taller than my own respectable height. I'm from the east, your Madge, Freya. A small village near the border. It doesn't exist anymore. What happened to it? Fire. The word came out flat, emotionless, but I saw his jaw tighten. I was a child when it burned. Everyone died, my parents, my neighbors, everyone but me. I'm sorry. I reached out without thinking, and placed my hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath my palm. The touch sent electricity arcing up my arm, and I heard him inhale sharply. How did you survive? A woman found me. She took me in, raised me, taught me everything I know. His hand came up to cover mine, his fingers warm and rough with calluses that came from more than just piano playing. She's the one who taught me music, how to dance, how to move through the world without being seen. She said these things would save my life someday. What was her name? I felt him tense beneath my hand, felt something shift in the air between us. Does it matter? Everything about you matters. The words came out more intense than I'd intended, and I saw his eyes widen slightly. Play something for me. Just for me. He moved toward the smaller piano in the corner of my study, and I followed, unable to put more than a few feet of distance between us. When he sat down, I stood beside him, close enough that my skirts brushed his leg, close enough that I could watch his fingers find the keys. This time, the music was different, slower, sadder. It sounded like longing and loss, and something so achingly beautiful that I felt tears prick my eyes. Without thinking, I rested my hand on his shoulder, and he shuddered beneath my touch, but didn't stop playing. The music swelled, filling the room, filling me, until I felt like I might shatter from the beauty of it. When the last note faded, neither of us moved. My hand was still on his shoulder. His fingers still rested on the keys. The silence between us was charged with something dangerous, something inevitable. Dance with me, I whispered. He turned on the bench to face me, and I saw the conflict warring in his expression. Your Majesty, Freya, and that's a command from your queen if you need one. He stood, and suddenly we were close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. I don't think this is wise. I don't care about wise either. I seem to have stopped caring about a lot of things since you played that first note. I took his hand, placing it on my waist, and felt his fingers flex against the silk of my gown. Dance with me, Felix. He relented, and we began to move even though there was no music beyond the memory of what he'd just played. He led me in a waltz that was far too intimate for a queen and her servant, our bodies close enough that I could feel the heat of him seeping through my clothes. Every place we touched burned, my hand in his hand on my waist, the occasional brush of our legs as we turned. It was intoxicating and terrifying, and more alive than I'd felt in years. You dance like a nobleman, I observed, and felt him miss a step before recovering. My teacher was thorough. This woman who raised you, she sounds remarkable. She was. Again that tension, that tightness in his voice. She's dead now. I'm sorry. Recently, 2 years ago, Hunter got her. I stumbled this time, the implications of that statement hitting me like a physical blow. Hunters only killed one kind of people. She was a witch. He nodded, and I saw pain flicker across his face. Does that disturb you? No. It makes me wonder what you are. I studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes, the way he wouldn't quite meet my gaze. There was magic in your playing tonight. I felt it. My wolf felt it. I'm Beta, he said, as if that explained anything. Just a Beta. No one special, but he was lying. I could feel it in the way his pulse jumped where my thumb rested against his wrist, could taste it in the air between us. He was something more than Beta, something hidden and dangerous, and instead of frightening me, it made me want him more. We stopped dancing, though neither of us stepped back. We stood there in the middle of my study, his hand still on my waist, mine still resting on his shoulder, breathing each other's air. I should go, he said, but he didn't move. You should, I agreed, but I didn't let him go. Instead, I reached up and cupped his face in my palm, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes fell closed at my touch like it caused him pain. "What are you so afraid of, Felix?" "You," he whispered, and his voice was raw with honesty. "I'm afraid of you, of this, of what you make me feel." "Good. I'm terrified too." And then I kissed him. It was supposed to be gentle, exploratory, a first kiss between two people testing the waters of attraction. It became something else entirely within seconds. His mouth opened under mine, one hand sliding into my hair and disrupting the careful coiffure my ladies had arranged earlier, the other pulling me flush against him with a possessiveness that made my wolf sing with triumph. I tasted desperation in that kiss, and hunger, and something darker that I couldn't quite name. He kissed me like I was water and he was dying of thirst, like he was trying to memorize the taste of me, like this was goodbye and hello and everything in between. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. My carefully applied cosmetics were smudged. His composure was completely shattered. He stared at me with those drowning blue eyes, and I saw something in them that looked almost like grief. "You're my mate," I said, and it wasn't a question. My wolf had never been more certain of anything. "I felt it the moment I saw you. Tell me you feel it too." "I feel it," he admitted, and his voice was hoarse. "Moon goddess, help me, I feel it." "Then why do you look like you're mourning?" He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were full of something I couldn't read. "Your Majesty, Freya, there's something I need to tell you. About me, about who I am, and why I came here." My heart began to race, but not with desire this time, with premonition, with the sudden sick certainty that whatever he was about to say would change everything. "What is it?" He opened his mouth to speak, and that's when someone hammered on my study door, with enough force to rattle the frame. We sprang apart like guilty children, and I had to take 3 deep breaths before I trusted my voice enough to call out, "Who is it?" "The Council, Your Majesty." Lord Chancellor Grayson's voice was tight with disapproval. "We need to speak with you immediately. It's urgent." Felix and I stared at each other across 3 feet of space that felt like miles. His face had gone pale, and one hand moved unconsciously toward his pocket, touching something there that made a small, glassy sound. A look of pure panic crossed his face before he schooled it into neutrality. "Go," I whispered, "through the servants' passage behind the bookcase. Quickly." He hesitated for one more moment, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to memorize my face. Then he whispered 4 words that would haunt me for days to come. "I'm so sorry, Freya." And then he was gone, disappeared through the hidden door with a grace that spoke of practice, leaving me standing alone in my study with my hair in disarray and my lips swollen, and absolutely no idea that the man I'd just claimed as my mate had come to my castle with a dagger hidden in his quarters and a mission to end my life. I smoothed my hair as best I could, straightened my gown, and went to face my counsel with my heart still racing and the taste of him still on my tongue. I had no way of knowing that everything I thought I knew about love and destiny and fate was a carefully constructed lie designed to destroy me. No way of knowing that the woman who had raised Felix had spent 20 years programming him to be the weapon that would finally end the Blood Moon line. No way of knowing that in his pocket he carried a crystal that held the malevolent soul of the witch who had once been my best friend, who had loved my father, who had burned her own village to the ground and blamed my family for her crimes. All I knew was that I'd found my mate, and for the first time in 7 years of lonely rule, I felt something other than duty burning in my chest. I opened the door to my council, plastered on my queen's face, and prepared to defend the choice I'd already made, the choice that would nearly destroy us both before we had a chance to truly begin. They came for me at dawn, the Council of Elders, their faces carved from stone and judgment. They knew about Felix, and they were going to make me choose. I hadn't slept. How could I? With my body still humming from his kiss, my wolf pacing restlessly beneath my skin like a caged thing desperate for freedom. I'd dismissed the council the night before with vague reassurances about needing time to consider important matters, but their eyes had been full of suspicion and something harder, something that tasted like betrayal on the back of my tongue. They'd seen the state of me when I'd opened that door, hair mussed and lips swollen, and they'd drawn their conclusions with the kind of speed that comes from years of political maneuvering. The sun was barely cresting the horizon when they assembled in the throne room without my summons, 5 alphas whose combined age probably exceeded 3 centuries. Lord Chancellor Grayson stood at their center, his silver hair gleaming in the weak morning light that filtered through the stained glass windows. Lady Helena to his right, her expression so cold it could freeze blood. Duke Aldrich, Marcus the war general, Father Benedict, in his clerical robes looking more warrior than priest. They formed a semicircle before my throne like judges before the condemned, and I felt something hot and furious kindle in my chest at their presumption. I descended the stairs to meet them on level ground, bare feet silent on the cold marble, wearing only the simple white shift I'd slept in with my father's heavy fur cloak thrown over my shoulders. My hair hung loose down my back, wild and uncombed. No crown, no jewelry, no armor of royalty to hide behind. If they wanted to confront me, they would confront me as Freya, not just their queen. "This is highly irregular," I said, and my voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling with a coldness that matched Lady Helena's expression. "I don't recall calling a council session. We thought it prudent to speak with you privately, Your Majesty." Grayson's voice was careful, measured, the tone of a man walking through a minefield. "Before the rest of the court wakes, before rumor becomes scandal, speak then." I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling the crescent moon birthmark on my shoulder burning like a brand beneath the fabric. My wolf was snarling, fur raised, ready for a fight. Lady Helena stepped forward, her pale eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You were seen, Your Majesty, with the servant, Felix Ashford, in your private study, alone, for over an hour. I am aware of where I was and who I was with, Helena. I don't require a recounting of my own evening." "Then you're also aware," she continued, her voice sharp as broken glass, "of how this appears. An unmarried alpha queen sequestering herself with a male servant. The impropriety alone is enough to set every tongue in the kingdom wagging. I don't particularly care what tongues are wagging." I met her gaze without flinching, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "Unless the council has made a habit of dictating whom I may or may not speak with in my own castle. This isn't about conversation, and you know it." Marcus the general moved forward, his scarred face twisted with something between concern and anger. "I've served your family for 40 years, girl. I fought beside your father in 3 wars. I helped crown you when you were barely more than a child. And I'm telling you now, as someone who loves you like a daughter, that whatever you're thinking about that beta, you need to stop. Immediately." The word beta hit like a slap, the disdain in his voice making my hands curl into fists at my sides. "Felix Ashford is a servant," Grayson interrupted, "of unknown origin, no family, no pack affiliation. He appeared at our gates 3 days ago with nothing but the clothes on his back and a letter of reference from a dead hedge witch in the Eastern Territories. And you hired him," I pointed out. "So either you're incompetent at vetting staff, or you found nothing objectionable about his background." "We found nothing," Helena admitted, and I heard the frustration in her voice. "Which is almost more concerning than finding something. It's as if he didn't exist before 3 weeks ago. No records, no history, just a very talented beta with impossibly refined manners and a letter from a woman who died 2 years past." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face carefully neutral. Felix had said the woman who raised him was dead, killed by hunters. A hedge witch, powerful enough to teach him magic, to give him the tools to move through noble society undetected. The pieces were there, scattered like bones waiting to be read, but I refused to see the pattern they formed. "I want to speak to him again," I said, and watched their faces harden. "In fact, I intend to speak to him a great deal more, because Felix Ashford is my mate." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the shock ripple across their faces, watched Grayson's complexion go gray, watched Helena's mouth fall open in an expression I'd never thought to see on her carefully controlled features. Father Benedict made the sign of the moon goddess, and Marcus looked like I'd struck him. "No," Helena breathed. "No, that's not possible. You haven't even presented him to the pack. The mate bond can't have formed." I know what I felt. My voice came out harder than I intended, alpha command bleeding through despite my attempt to remain calm. My wolf recognized him the moment I saw him. The pull, the scent, the absolute certainty. "You're all mated. You know what it feels like. You can't tell me I'm wrong about my own mate bond. Even if he is your fated mate," Grayson said carefully. "That doesn't change the political reality, Your Majesty. A beta consort. The other packs would see it as weakness. They already question your authority because you're female and unwed. If you bind yourself to a commoner with no alpha blood, then I'll transform him." The words came out before I'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, I felt the rightness of them settle in my bones. The ancient ritual. Beta to alpha through mate bond transference. It's been done before. 3 times in recorded history, Father Benedict interjected, his voice grave. Twice. Both parties died in the attempt. The 3rd time, the beta survived, but was driven mad by the power. It's not a ritual undertaken lightly, Your Majesty. Nothing about this is light. I moved toward them, closing the distance until I could see the individual lines of worry etched into their faces. I am 29 years old. For 7 years, I have ruled alone. For 7 years, you've paraded eligible alphas before me like prize studs, and I've rejected them all because none of them made me feel anything but duty and obligation. Now I've found my mate, my true mate, the one the moon goddess herself chose for me. And you're asking me to turn my back on that because of politics? We're asking you to think, Helena said, and for the first time, I heard something like compassion in her voice. About your pack, about your bloodline, about what your father would say. My father married my mother against your advice too, didn't he? I watched them shift uncomfortably, confirming what I'd always suspected. She was Omega, gentle, weak by your standards. You told him an alpha king needed an alpha queen, someone who could stand beside him in battle, but he chose her anyway because he loved her, and I was the result. Are you telling me that was a mistake? Your mother was of noble blood, Grayson argued. Ancient lineage. She brought alliances and territories. This boy brings nothing. He brings himself, and he brings me joy, which is something I haven't felt since my parents died. My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for the weakness. I'm not asking for your blessing. I'm informing you of my decision. I will take Felix Ashford as my mate. I will attempt the transformation ritual, and I will do it with or without your support. The threat hung in the air between us, unspoken, but clearly understood. With or without your support meant with or without you on my council. It meant I would replace them all if they forced my hand. It meant I was willing to tear apart the political structure I'd spent 7 years building, rather than give up the one thing that was mine and mine alone. Marcus was the first to break, his shoulders sagging as he exchanged glances with the others. If we agree to this madness, there must be conditions. Tests. He must prove himself worthy of the title you're offering. What kind of tests? I asked, though I already knew. The traditional trials for any outsider seeking to join the pack. Combat, wisdom, loyalty. 3 challenges that had broken stronger wolves than Felix. 3 days of trials beginning tomorrow, Helena said. Combat against our best warrior. A test of strategy and wisdom before the council. And a private test of loyalty that we will devise. If he passes all 3, we will consent to the transformation ritual. If he fails even one, he leaves this castle and never returns. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to refuse, to tell them I was queen, and my word was law. But I also knew that a forced coronation of a beta consort would split my pack down the middle, and I couldn't afford civil war. Not when our borders were already weak, not when neighboring kingdoms watched for any sign of vulnerability. Agreed, I said, but there's one more condition. Mine. When he passes these tests, when the ritual succeeds and he stands beside me as Alpha King, you will all acknowledge him publicly. No whispers, no subtle undermining. You will support him as you support me, or you will resign your positions. All of you. They didn't like it. I could see the resistance in every line of their bodies. But they also knew I had them cornered. Refusing meant I would force the issue anyway, and at least this way, they maintained some illusion of control. Agreed, Grayson said finally. May the moon goddess have mercy on us all. They filed out one by one, leaving me standing alone in the throne room as the sun rose fully and painted the walls in shades of blood and gold. My hands were shaking with a combination of fury and fear, and I pressed them against my stomach, feeling my breakfast threatening to make a reappearance. What had I just done? Committed myself and Felix to a ritual that had a 2/3 mortality rate? Staked my kingdom's stability on a man I'd known for less than 24 hours? Yes, I had, because my wolf had chosen him, and I trusted her more than I'd ever trusted my own mind. Because when he'd kissed me, I'd felt more alive than I had in 7 years of lonely rule. Because destiny was a real thing in our world, and fate had brought him to me for a reason. I just had to believe that reason wasn't my destruction. I found Felix in the servants' quarters 2 hours later, after bathing and dressing and presenting something resembling a composed queen to my ladies. He was sitting on a narrow cot in a room he shared with 3 other young men, none of whom were present, probably already at their morning duties. He looked up when I entered, and I watched shock and something darker cross his face as he scrambled to his feet and bowed. "Your Majesty, I didn't. You shouldn't be here. I go where I please in my own castle." I closed the door behind me, noting the sparse room with its stone walls and single window. This was where they'd housed him? In quarters fit for prisoners rather than the musician who'd enchanted my entire court. "We need to talk. About us. About what happens next." He looked like he might be sick, one hand moving unconsciously to his pocket again. That same glassy sound I'd heard last night. "Nothing can happen next. Last night was a mistake. I should never have kissed you. I should never have. My council knows about us." I watched his face drain of color. "And I told them you're my mate, that I intend to bond with you officially, and transform you into an alpha through the ancient ritual." He sat down heavily on the cot, his breathing coming too fast, too shallow. "You can't. Freya, you can't. I'm not. You don't know. I know you're afraid." I knelt in front of him, taking his hands in mine even as he tried to pull away. His fingers were cold despite the warmth of the room, and I could feel him trembling. "I know this is moving fast, but I also know what I felt when I touched you, what my wolf recognized in you. You felt it too. I know you did. Feeling something doesn't make it right." His voice was raw with emotion, and when he finally met my eyes, I saw desperation there. "Your Majesty, Freya, if you knew who I really was, where I came from, what I was sent here to, then tell me." I gripped his hands tighter, willing him to trust me. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. That's what mates do." He opened his mouth, and I saw the confession forming on his lips, saw him gathering the courage to speak. Then his entire body went rigid, his eyes rolling back in his head for just a moment, before refocusing on me with an expression I didn't recognize. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless, like someone else was speaking through him. "I am honored beyond measure by your attention, Your Majesty. I will do whatever you require of me." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. That wasn't Felix speaking. That wasn't the voice of the man who'd kissed me with such desperate hunger, who'd looked at me with eyes full of conflict and desire. This was something else. "Felix?" I touched his face, and he blinked, seeming to come back to himself. "I'm sorry, He shook his head like he was clearing cobwebs. "What were you saying?" "I was saying that the council has set 3 trials for you, beginning tomorrow. Combat, wisdom, and loyalty. If you pass them all, they'll consent to our bonding and the transformation ritual. And if I fail, you won't fail." I said it with more confidence than I felt. "You're stronger than they know, smarter, and you have something none of them do." "What's that?" "Me. You have me in your corner and I don't lose." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw so many emotions flickering across his face that I couldn't track them all. Love, yes. Fear, definitely. But also something that looked almost like grief, like he was mourning something that hadn't died yet. The trials began the next day, and I'd never been more terrified in my life. The entire pack gathered in the training yard to watch, hundreds of wolves in human form crowding the space until the air was thick with the musk of anticipation and judgment. Felix stood in the center of the ring wearing borrowed fighting leathers, facing Marcus himself, our war general and most skilled combatant. The old warrior had removed his shirt despite the cold, showing the roadmap of scars that covered his torso, each one a story of survival. He held a practice sword in one hand and regarded Felix with the kind of assessing look that had broken recruits before the fight even began. I sat in the place of honor at the edge of the ring, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my nails drew blood from my palms. Helena sat beside me, her face unreadable, while Grayson stood behind us with his arms crossed over his chest. "First blood or submission?" Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "By pack law and moon goddess witness." Felix nodded, gripping his own practice sword with a confidence that seemed at odds with his servant status. Where had a hedge witch taught him to hold a weapon like that? The blade was an extension of his arm, balanced and ready, his stance perfect in a way that spoke of years of training. The fight began without ceremony. Marcus lunged, and Felix parried with a speed that drew gasps from the crowd. Steel rang against steel, the sound sharp and bright in the cold morning air. I watched, barely breathing, as they circled each other, trading blows that would have felled lesser men. Felix was fast, impossibly fast, moving like water around Marcus's powerful strikes. But Marcus had decades of experience and the brutal efficiency of a warrior who'd survived more battles than most men had seen winters. Blood splattered on the packed earth, Marcus's blood, from a cut along his ribs. The old warrior looked down at it in surprise, then up at Felix with newfound respect. They reset, began again, and this time Marcus wasn't holding back. He came at Felix with the full weight of his alpha strength, and I saw Felix beginning to flag, saw him taking hits that left bruises blooming across his pale skin. He was going to lose. I could see it happening, could feel the despair rising in my throat, and then something changed. Felix's eyes flashed with something that wasn't quite natural, and his next movement was so fast I almost missed it. The practice sword flew from Marcus's hand, and Felix had the blade pressed to the old warrior's throat before anyone could blink. The yard went silent. "Submission," Marcus said, and though his voice was rough, there was something like pride in it. "Well fought, boy." Felix lowered the sword and stepped back, bowing with a respect that seemed genuine. But I'd seen that flash in his eyes, that moment of something other. Magic? Some enhancement that the witch had taught him? Whatever it was, no one else seemed to have noticed, and Felix was already moving away from the ring, accepting congratulations from wolves who moments before had been betting on his defeat. The wisdom trial came that afternoon, held in the council chamber where Felix was presented with an impossible problem. 2 border villages were feuding over water rights, both with legitimate claims, both threatening to leave the pack if not satisfied. He had 1 hour to devise a solution that would appease both parties. I watched through the observation window as Felix paced the chamber, his fingers steepled against his lips, his brilliant mind clearly working through angles and possibilities. When the hour was up, he presented a solution so elegant in its simplicity that even Helena smiled. Shared management of the water rights, rotating access, and a third-party mediator to ensure fairness. It addressed both villages' needs while strengthening pack unity rather than fragmenting it. "Where did you learn to think like that?" Grayson asked, and I heard genuine curiosity in his voice. "My teacher believed that survival required more than physical strength," Felix answered. "She said that the mind was the sharpest weapon anyone could wield." "She taught you well," Helena acknowledged, and I saw the subtle shift in her expression. She was beginning to see what I saw, the intelligence, the potential, the worth of the man I'd chosen. But it was the 3rd trial, held in private as tradition demanded, that nearly broke me. I wasn't allowed to observe, wasn't told the nature of the test until after it was complete. All I knew was that Felix disappeared into a locked room with Grayson and didn't emerge for 3 hours. When he finally came out, his face was pale but composed, and Grayson looked shaken in a way I'd never seen. "He passed," the Chancellor said simply. "He passed all 3 trials. By pack law, he has proven himself worthy." "What did you do to him?" I demanded, noting the way Felix wouldn't meet my eyes. "We offered him a choice," Helena said, appearing from the shadows. "Wealth beyond measure, lands, titles, everything a beta could want. All he had to do was leave your service and never speak of what happened between you." My heart stopped. "And he refused," Grayson said, and now I understood the shakiness in his voice. "He said that all the wealth in the world meant nothing compared to you, that he would rather die at your side than live in luxury without you." I looked at Felix, and he finally met my gaze. I saw shame there, and pain, and something that looked like self-loathing. But I also saw love, real and true and desperate. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, and I didn't understand why he was apologizing for passing a test, for choosing me, for proving everyone wrong. I wouldn't understand until it was too late, until his body was possessed and his hands were around my throat. But in that moment, all I felt was triumph and a love so overwhelming it physically hurt. That night, I summoned him to my chambers once more, not for ceremony, not for politics, just for us. He came wearing the new clothes the council had grudgingly provided, dark velvet that made his blue eyes luminous in the candlelight. I met him at the door and pulled him inside, kissing him with all the pent-up fear and relief and desire from the last 2 days. "You did it," I breathed against his mouth. "You passed. You're mine now. Officially, Freya," he said, and I heard warning in his voice, heard him trying once more to tell me something important. "Before we go any further, before the ceremony, I need to tell you about your past," I finished, pulling him toward the sitting area by the fire. "I know. You keep trying to confess something. So confess. Tell me whatever dark secret you think will change how I feel." He sat down heavily, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. "The woman who raised me, the witch. Her name was Morgana." I went very still. I knew that name, Every wolf in the Blood Moon pack knew that name. Morgana of the East, he continued, not seeing my reaction. She found me when I was a child. After the fire that killed my village, she raised me, taught me everything. Magic, music, refinement. Everything I am is because of her. Felix, I said carefully, my mind racing through implications. Morgana was banished from this pack 20 years ago. She tried to murder my mother and me. She burned. I know, he said, and his voice broke. I know what the official story says, but she told me a different version. She said your father murdered her entire village, that your family was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of innocent people, including my parents. She raised me to believe. He stopped, seemed to gather himself. She raised me with a purpose, a mission, and I don't know what's true anymore. I don't know what to believe. The room spun around me. This was worse than I'd imagined, worse than any simple secret or hidden shame. He'd been raised by my family's greatest enemy, programmed with lies, shaped into, what, a weapon, a tool for revenge? And yet he was here, telling me this, fighting against whatever conditioning she'd drilled into him. What was the mission? I asked, though I already knew, already understood what Morgana had been planning for 20 years. His hand moved to his pocket again, that glassy sound, and I saw tears sliding down his face. I was supposed to kill you, get close to you, make you trust me, and then end the Blood Moon line forever. I should have been afraid, should have called the guards, should have thrown him in the dungeons, should have done 1,000 things other than what I actually did. Instead, I moved across the space between us and took his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. But you didn't, I said. You could have killed me 12 times already. That first night in my study, we were alone. Last night, I was asleep and vulnerable. Today, during the trials, you had a sword, but you didn't do it, because whatever lies she told you, whatever poison she poured into your ears, you know the truth now. You feel it. The mate bond doesn't lie, Felix. It can't lie. If I was the monster she described, if my family deserved the kind of vengeance she wanted, the moon goddess would never have chosen you for me. You don't understand, he sobbed, and I'd never heard such anguish in a human voice. I want to believe that. I want to choose you, but she's still here. She's still in my head, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight her. Before I could ask what he meant, a knock at the door interrupted us. A servant's voice called through the wood, deferential and formal. Your Majesty, the priestesses have arrived to begin preparations for the transformation ritual. You're needed in the temple. I looked at Felix, torn between staying with him and duty. He wiped his face and stood, composing himself with visible effort. Go, he said. We have 3 days of preparation, plenty of time to finish this conversation. I didn't want to leave him, not when he was in this state, not when I'd just learned the terrible truth of his past. But the ritual required precise timing, specific ceremonies, and delays could be disastrous. I kissed him once more, tasting salt from his tears, and whispered against his lips, We're going to survive this. Both of us. Together. I promise. If only I'd known that some promises are impossible to keep. The next 3 days passed in a blur of ceremony and separation. I was sequestered in the temple, with the priestesses of the moon goddess, undergoing ritual baths and fasts, designed to prepare my body and spirit for the massive transfer of power the transformation would require. They sang songs in the old language, painted symbols on my skin with ash and blessed water, and kept me away from all contact with the outside world. It was tradition, they said. Necessary, they said. The mate bond had to be pure, uncomplicated by physical presence before the ritual could succeed. But I felt Felix through that bond, distant but present, and as the days wore on, I felt him changing, becoming more agitated, more desperate. The connection between us grew sharp with pain, and I tried to reach out to him through it, tried to send comfort and love and reassurance. Sometimes I felt him respond, felt an answering warmth. Other times, there was only cold silence that terrified me more than I wanted to admit. I didn't know that he was going through his own hell in a different part of the castle, locked in a room with nothing but his thoughts, and the crystal in his pocket that pulsed with increasing urgency. I didn't know that Morgana's voice was growing stronger, no longer whispers but full conversations, her presence so real he could almost see her standing in the corner, smiling her terrible smile. I didn't know that he was seeing visions, memories that weren't his own, of my father ordering villages burned, of soldiers with the blood moon crest cutting down women and children, of Morgana screaming as her world burned around her. I didn't know that mixed with these false memories were flashes of truth, brief glimpses of reality that confused him more than the lies. A woman with Morgana's face setting fires, a child screaming, a baby lifted from the ashes, him, by a woman whose smile was anything but kind. He was beginning to piece together the real story, beginning to understand that everything he'd been told was a carefully constructed fiction. But understanding didn't break the binding spell Morgana had woven into his very bones. On the third night, as I lay on the cold stone floor of the temple surrounded by sleeping priestesses, I felt something through the bond that made me bolt upright, gasping. Felix was in pain, terrible pain, and there was a presence pressing against him that felt ancient and malevolent and horribly familiar. I tried to run to him. The priestesses stopped me physically, their hands gentle but firm, explaining that breaking the ritual preparation now would doom us both. Tomorrow was the ceremony. Tomorrow we would bond and he would transform and everything would be all right. Just one more night. Just a few more hours. I forced myself to lie back down, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and felt Felix fighting something I couldn't see, battling a darkness I couldn't reach. And I prayed to the moon goddess with a fervor I hadn't felt since the night my parents died, begging her to keep him safe, to keep him strong, to let us both survive long enough to have the life together that we deserved. Morning came with gray light filtering through the temple windows. The priestesses dressed me in ceremonial white, silver thread woven through the fabric in patterns that mimicked wolf fur. They crowned me with a circlet of moonstone and led me through the castle toward the sacred grove where the ritual would take place. The entire pack would attend, bearing witness as their queen took a mate and transformed him into their king. I was ready. My body thrummed with power and purpose. My wolf was calm for the first time in days, certain and content. This was right. This was destiny. In a few hours, Felix and I would be bound together so completely that nothing could separate us. Not death, not time, not the ghost of a vengeful witch who'd spent 20 years plotting her revenge. We entered the grove as the sun reached its zenith, and I saw Felix waiting at the altar, carved from ancient stone, surrounded by candles and offerings and priestesses chanting in the old tongue. He was dressed in white to match me, his dark hair gleaming in the dappled sunlight, and he was so beautiful it made my chest ache. Then he turned to face me, and my blood ran cold. Something was wrong with his eyes. They were still blue, still his, but there was a shadow moving behind them, something dark and writhing that made me think of parasites and possession and things that should stay dead. He smiled at me, and it wasn't quite right. The expression a beat too slow, like someone had to remember how to make that particular face. I felt it then, through our incomplete bond, the presence that had been tormenting him for 3 days. And I recognized it, recognized her, the psychic signature as familiar as my own heartbeat, because she'd been part of my pack once, had played in these very woods when we were children, had sat beside me at countless festivals before jealousy and madness had twisted her into something monstrous. Morgana hadn't died. She'd never died. Hunters had killed her body, yes, but her soul had escaped, bound itself to some object, waited for the perfect vessel and the perfect moment. And I was walking toward that moment like a lamb to slaughter, smiling and hopeful, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. The last thing I saw before taking my place beside Felix at the altar was the morning sun glinting off something in his pocket, something small and crystalline that pulsed with a sickly green light. The last thing I felt was Felix's consciousness screaming inside his own mind, beating against invisible walls, trying desperately to warn me, even as his mouth smiled and his hand reached for mine. The last thing I heard, just before the ceremony began, was a voice that came from Felix's mouth, but wasn't his voice at all, feminine and triumphant, and filled with 20 years of bottled hate. Hello, little Freya. Today, the last blood moon dies by the hand of the one she loves most. Isn't that poetic? And then there was nothing but chaos, and blood, and the sound of my own wolf's howl as she emerged to fight for both our lives. I walked down that aisle toward Felix clothed in moonlight and silk, and I swear I could taste the wrongness in the air, bitter as nightshade on my tongue. But love makes fools of even queens, and I was the greatest fool of all. The sacred grove was transformed into something from a dream, hundreds of candles floating in the air through levitation magic, their light dancing across the ancient oaks that formed a natural cathedral around us. The full moon hung heavy and silver overhead, so close it seemed I could reach up and touch it, and the pack surrounded us in concentric circles, their faces painted with the traditional ceremonial markings. The priestesses had woven flowers into my hair, white roses and moonflowers that filled the air with their cloying sweetness, and my dress was pure silk that clung to every curve before flowing behind me like liquid starlight. I felt beautiful. I felt powerful. I felt like I was walking toward my destiny with open arms, and no idea it would try to strangle me. Felix stood at the altar carved from stone so ancient it predated my family's rule by centuries, wearing white linen that made his dark hair seem almost black in the moonlight. The high priestess stood between us, her face obscured by a silver mask shaped like the moon itself, and she held the ceremonial blade that would mix our blood and bind our souls. I couldn't see Felix's expression clearly from a distance, but I could feel him through the incomplete bond, could taste his emotions like wine on the back of my tongue: fear, grief, love, desperation, all swirling together into something that made my steps falter for just a moment before I forced myself forward. When I reached him, I saw his eyes up close, and my heart stuttered in my chest. They were wrong. Not the warm blue I'd fallen in love with, but something darker, something that seemed to have shadows moving behind the irises like parasites swimming through water. His smile was wrong too, a half-second delayed, like someone having to remember how a human face was supposed to arrange itself into that expression. But the pack was watching, hundreds of eyes boring into my back, and the priestess was already beginning the invocation in the old tongue, and I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just nerves and fear, and the weight of what we were about to attempt. "Children of the moon," the priestess intoned, her voice carrying across the grove like silver bells, "we gathered to witness the sacred bond between Alpha and chosen mate, Queen Freya Bloodmoon, last of her bloodline, keeper of the ancient territories, and Felix Ashford, who has proven himself worthy through trial and dedication. Speak now, if any challenge this union, or hold your peace unto the moon goddess herself." Silence, not even breathing, the entire pack waiting for someone to object, but the council had given their word, and pack law was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke, and the moment passed like a door closing on the last chance for escape. The priestess turned to Felix first, as tradition demanded the lesser rank speak before the greater. "Felix Ashford, do you come before the moon goddess of your own free will, prepared to bind your soul to Queen Freya Bloodmoon for all your days, to serve and protect, to honor and cherish, to stand beside her through darkness and light, until death claims you both?" Felix's jaw clenched, and I saw sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold February air. His hands trembled where they hung at his sides, and when he spoke, his voice cracked on the first word. "I do. I swear by the moon goddess and all her children, I will protect Freya with my life." The way he said, "protect," made something in my chest twist, like the word meant something different to him than it did to everyone else. But the priestess was already turning to me, the moonlight glinting off her mask, and I had no time to analyze the wrongness I'd heard in his tone. "Queen Freya Bloodmoon, do you come before the moon goddess of your own free will, prepared to bind your soul to Felix Ashford for all your days, to honor him as your equal, to transform him through your power from beta to alpha, to take him as your king and mate until death claims you both?" "I do." My voice rang out clear and strong, no hesitation, because whatever darkness was moving in Felix's eyes, I knew the man beneath it was good, was mine, was worth fighting for. "I swear by the moon goddess and the blood of my ancestors, I claim Felix Ashford as my true mate." The priestess raised the ceremonial blade, its edge catching the moonlight, and gestured for us to extend our palms. I offered mine first, barely flinching as the blade bit into my skin, watching my blood well up dark and red against my pale flesh. Felix extended his hand next, and I saw it shaking so badly the priestess had to steady his wrist before making the cut. Our blood mixed where she pressed our palms together, hot and slick and binding, and I felt the magic begin. It started as a warmth in my chest, spreading outward like ripples in a pond, traveling down my arm to where our joined hands connected us. I felt Felix's presence in my mind for the first time, really felt him, not just the surface emotions, but the depths of him, and what I found there made my breath catch. Love, yes, overwhelming and desperate and real, but underneath it, terror and guilt so profound it felt like drowning, and deeper still, something else, something ancient and malevolent and feminine, something that whispered in a voice I'd tried to forget for 20 years. Little Freya, so trusting, so blind, just like your father. My eyes flew to Felix's face, and I saw the exact moment his expression changed. Saw something that wasn't him looking out through those blue eyes. Saw a smile that was all wrong stretch across his beautiful face. "Felix," I whispered, and the pack leaned forward, sensing something off, murmurs beginning to ripple through the crowd. "He's here," that wrong voice said from Felix's mouth, honeyed and hateful. "But he's not in control anymore. He fought so hard, the dear boy, resisted me every step of the way, but love made him weak. Love brought him to you. And now, finally, after 20 years of planning, I get to watch the light die in your eyes the way it died in mine." The bond snapped into place like a lightning strike, and I screamed as I felt her, felt Morgana's consciousness intertwined with Felix's, felt her hatred burning through the connection like acid in my veins. The pack erupted into chaos, wolves shifting forms, guards rushing forward, but it was already too late. Felix's free hand moved with inhuman speed, grabbing my throat, and the man I loved lifted me off my feet with strength no beta should possess. "Your father chose your mother," Morgana hissed through Felix's lips. His beautiful face contorted into something monstrous. "He chose her over me. He said I was too wild, too unstable, too dangerous to be queen. So I showed him dangerous. I burned my own village and blamed him. I killed everyone I'd ever loved and pinned it on the Blood Moon family. And then, I waited. Waited for the perfect weapon. Waited for a child to mold. Waited for you to grow up so I could take everything from you, the way he took everything from me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, my vision starting to blur at the edges. But I could feel Felix screaming inside his own mind, could feel him fighting her with everything he had, could taste his horror and self-loathing through the bond that now connected us all. My wolf surged forward with a roar that shook the trees, and my body exploded into my shifted form before conscious thought could catch up. White fur erupted across my skin as bones snapped and reformed, and suddenly I was 8 feet of apex predator with jaws that could crush steel and claws that could rend stone. I crashed into Felix's possessed body, slamming him backward away from the altar, and we rolled across the grove floor in a tangle of fur and flailing limbs, and Morgana's laughter echoing through the trees. "There she is!" Morgana crowed, using Felix's body to launch a blast of dark magic that sent me flying into an ancient oak hard enough to crack the trunk. "The white wolf of prophecy. Your father told me about you. The night you were born, the seers said you'd be the strongest alpha in generations. I wonder if you'll be strong enough to kill your own mate." I struggled to my feet, ribs screaming with pain, and prowled around him in a circle, looking for an opening that wouldn't require harming Felix's body. The pack was scattering, some shifting to join the fight, others fleeing with their children toward the castle. I saw my council trying to organize a defense, saw Father Benedict directing the priestesses to erect magical barriers, saw guards with blessed silver weapons forming ranks. They were all too slow. Morgana raised Felix's hands, and dark magic exploded outward like a shockwave, slamming into everyone within 50 feet. I watched in horror as wolves were thrown backward, smashing into trees and rocks with sickening crunches. 3 guards rushed her from different angles, and she twisted Felix's body with impossible grace, sending spears of shadow magic through their chests before they could get close. They fell without making a sound, blood pooling beneath them in the churned earth. "Stop," I tried to say through my wolf's throat, but it came out as a howl of anguish. I lunged forward, trying to pin his body without hurting him, trying to restrain rather than attack. My jaws closed around Felix's arm, carefully, not breaking skin, just holding, and I felt Morgana's fury through the bond. "You won't hurt him," she laughed. "You love him too much. That's your weakness, little queen. That's how I win." She sent another blast of magic point blank into my face, and I smelled my own fur burning, tasted copper as blood filled my mouth from a split lip. But I didn't let go. I dragged Felix's possessed body backward toward the altar, thinking maybe the priestesses could help. Maybe there was some ritual to drive out a possessing spirit. Maybe a dagger of pure shadow materialized in Felix's hand and plunged into my shoulder, and this time I did let go, howling in agony as the magic burned through muscle and bone. I limped away, blood matting my white fur black, and watched through pain-hazed eyes as Morgana climbed to Felix's feet and surveyed the carnage with satisfaction. The battle had spilled into the castle grounds now, guards trying desperately to contain the threat while evacuating civilians. I heard screaming from the direction of the servants' quarters, smelled smoke, realized with dawning horror that she was systematically destroying everything I'd built, everyone I loved, using the body of the man I'd chosen to do it. I shifted back to human form, naked and bleeding and shaking with exhaustion. Morgana, stop. Felix is innocent in this. He was a child when you took him. Whatever happened between you and my father, he had nothing to do with it. Felix's body turned to face me, and for just a moment, I saw his eyes clear, saw him looking at me with such anguish, it felt like my heart was being torn from my chest. Freya, he gasped, and it was his voice. Really his voice. I'm sorry. I tried to warn you. I tried to... Silence. Morgana's presence slammed back down over his consciousness, and I felt Felix's awareness being crushed under the weight of her will. You've served your purpose, boy. You got me close enough. Now be quiet while I finish what I started 20 years ago. Dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky, painting the smoke-filled air in shades of gray and pink that seemed obscene given the destruction below. Bodies littered the castle grounds, some moving weakly, others still as death. I saw Duke Aldrich trying to staunch a wound in Lady Helena's side, saw Marcus rallying the surviving guards for another assault, saw Father Benedict on his knees drawing protective sigils in the dirt with shaking hands. We'd been fighting for hours, and I was losing. My body couldn't take much more. I'd shifted forms 3 times, each transformation slower than the last, each leaving me more drained. Blood loss and exhaustion were making my vision swim, and I knew with awful certainty that I was going to die here in the ruins of my own castle, killed by the man I loved, just like Morgana had planned. But I'd be damned if I went down without one last try. I shifted back to wolf form, pouring every ounce of strength I had left into the transformation, and my white fur gleamed in the pre-dawn light like a beacon. I charged across the torn earth, building speed despite the agony in my shoulder, despite the way my ribs grated with every breath. Morgana saw me coming and laughed, raising Felix's hands to launch another killing spell. But this time I didn't dodge. I shifted mid-leap back to human, vulnerable and small and deliberately non-threatening. Felix! I screamed his name with everything I had, felt it travel down the bond between us, felt it slam into his consciousness where Morgana had buried him. Felix, I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. Fight her. Fight for us. I crashed into his body, and we went down together. My arms wrapped around him, my face pressed against his chest, where I could hear his heart hammering like a trapped bird. Morgana tried to throw me off with magic, but I held on with everything I had, skin to skin, soul to soul, letting the incomplete mate bond flare between us like a golden thread in the darkness of possession. I don't care what she told you, I sobbed against his chest. I don't care what lies she fed you for 20 years. I know who you really are, Felix. I've seen your soul. You're good and kind, and you've been fighting her every step of the way. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. If you were truly meant to destroy me, we never would have been mates. Do you hear me? You're not her weapon. You're not her creature. You're mine. You're my mate, and I'm not giving you up without a fight. I felt him then, felt Felix's consciousness surge up from whatever dark place Morgana had shoved him, felt his awareness pressing against the inside of his own skin, like he was trying to claw his way back to control. Through the bond, I saw fragments of memory, saw the truth that Morgana had hidden from him for so long. I saw her setting fire to her own village 20 years ago, laughing as people screamed. I saw her pluck a baby from the ashes, Felix, and whisper promises of revenge into his infant ear. I saw years of psychological torture, of false memories implanted, of a child being shaped into a weapon by a woman who'd had 2 decades to perfect her cruelty. And I saw Felix fighting back, even as a child, maintaining some core of goodness that Morgana could never quite crush. I saw him hesitate 100 times over the years when given opportunities to do evil, saw him choosing kindness when he'd been taught to choose violence, saw him falling in love with me despite every instinct she'd programmed into him screaming that I was the enemy. That's it, I whispered, feeling his consciousness growing stronger. Come back to me. Fight her, Felix. You're stronger than she knows. For one glorious moment, his eyes cleared completely, blue and perfect and horrified. His hands came up to cradle my face with a gentleness that broke my heart. "Freya," he breathed. And it was all him. No shadow, no possession. My pocket. There's a crystal. Her soul is bound to it. You have to break it. You have to... Morgana's shriek of fury rattled the remaining windows in the castle. As she realized what was happening, I felt her consciousness slam back down over Felix's like a hammer, felt him scream inside his own mind as she took control again with vicious force. But I'd heard him. I'd understood. Felix's body threw me off with supernatural strength, sending me rolling across the torn earth. I came up in a crouch, naked and bleeding and barely able to stand, but my eyes locked on his pocket. On the faint green glow I could see emanating from within. The crystal, Morgana's soul trap, her anchor to this world and her tether to Felix's body. I ran toward him, or tried to, my legs barely cooperating. Marcus saw what I was trying to do and charged from the side, grabbing Felix's arms to restrain him, buying me precious seconds. Father Benedict joined him, chanting prayers of binding, and together they held him just long enough for me to reach into his pocket with shaking hands. The crystal was small, no larger than my thumb, but it burned like ice against my palm. I could feel Morgana's consciousness inside it, feel her rage and fear and the sudden realization that I'd found her vulnerability. Felix's body thrashed in Marcus's grip, dark magic exploding outward, and I saw the old warrior's skin begin to blacken and crack where he touched Felix's possessed flesh. "Let him go," I screamed, and Marcus obeyed, stumbling backward with ruined hands. Felix's body rounded on me, and I saw Morgana's panic in those eyes that should have been blue, but were now completely black. "You stupid girl," she hissed. "You think breaking that will save him? We're linked now. Destroy the crystal and the feedback will kill him. He dies either way. At least let me have the satisfaction of making it slow." She raised Felix's hand, and a blade of shadow magic materialized, longer and sharper than anything she'd conjured before. This was it. The killing blow. The end of the blood moon line, delivered by the hand of my own mate just like she'd always wanted. I looked at Felix's face one last time, saw him fighting behind those black eyes, saw him trying to stop his own body from moving, saw his love for me burning even through Morgana's darkness, and I knew what I had to do. I threw the crystal to the ground with all my remaining strength, watched it hit the stone edge of the altar, watched it begin to crack. Morgana's scream was inhuman, a sound of pure terror that came from Felix's throat and made blood run from my ears. The shadow blade in his hand flew forward even as the crystal shattered, and time seemed to slow to nothing. I saw each fragment of crystal spinning through the air, glowing with that sickly green light before going dark. I saw Morgana's consciousness being ripped from Felix's body, like a parasite torn from its host, saw her soul beginning to disintegrate without its anchor. I saw Felix's eyes clear to blue even as his legs buckled, and I saw the shadow blade, already in motion, unable to be stopped, heading straight for my heart. It hit like a freight train, punching through skin and muscle and bone, and I felt myself falling backward, my own blood hot and wet on my chest. I hit the ground and couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare up at the dawn sky and think how unfair it was that we'd come so close to winning. Felix collapsed beside me, his body convulsing as Morgana's magic left him, as the binding spells unraveled, as he came back to himself completely, for the first time in 20 years. His hand found mine, our fingers intertwining one last time, both of us bleeding out on the torn earth of the sacred grove. "Freya," he sobbed, trying to crawl toward me despite his own body's collapse. No, please. I'm so sorry. I'm so... Not your fault," I managed to whisper, tasting copper. "Never. Your fault." I heard screaming then, people rushing toward us, heard Helena shouting for healers, heard Father Benedict's prayers becoming more desperate. Someone tried to pull Felix away from me, but he fought them with the last of his strength, refusing to let go of my hand. "Don't leave me," he whispered, and his tears fell on my face like rain. "Please don't leave me. I just got you. We just found each other. Please." I wanted to tell him it would be okay, wanted to promise we'd survive this, wanted to say all the things I'd never have the chance to say if I died right here in the ruins of my own happiness, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of my vision, and my lungs wouldn't fill no matter how hard I tried, and I could feel my heart slowing, stuttering, preparing to stop. The last thing I saw was Felix's face, those blue eyes that I'd fallen in love with, full of anguish and love and a grief so profound it transcended words. The last thing I felt was his hand in mine, gripping so tight it should have hurt, but I was already too far gone to feel pain. The last thing I heard was his voice, broken and small, promising things neither of us could control. I'll find you, in this life or the next. I swear it. You're my mate, my queen, my everything. Don't you dare give up. Don't you... And then there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of my own heartbeat, growing fainter and fainter until even that was gone, and I floated in a void that might have been death or might have been something else entirely, somewhere between worlds, waiting to see if fate would be kind enough to give us one more chance. Darkness, then pain, then voices I didn't recognize chanting in languages I'd never heard. And through it all, one golden thread pulling me back, the mate bond humming like a wire stretched too tight, calling me home to consciousness and agony, and a body that felt like it had been shattered and poorly reassembled by amateur hands. I opened my eyes to a ceiling I didn't recognize, white plaster instead of the carved stone of my chambers, and the smell hit me immediately. Herbs and incense and blood, so much blood, mixed with the metallic tang of healing magic being channeled by multiple sources at once. My chest was on fire, each breath a study in suffering, and when I tried to move my head, the room spun sickeningly. "She's awake," someone said, female voice, cool hands pressing against my forehead. "Your Majesty, you need to stay still. The wound nearly killed you. We're not finished yet." I forced my eyes to focus through the haze of pain and saw faces surrounding my bed. Healers, at least a dozen of them, humans and shifters and two fae whose silver eyes glowed with power as they wove complicated spells above my body. White witches knelt in a circle around the bed, their hands linked as they chanted protection wards. And there, standing against the far wall with his arms crossed and his face carved from granite, was Marcus, watching over me like he'd been afraid to blink. "Felix," I croaked, and my voice was barely human, scraped raw from screaming or dying or both. "Where?" "Alive," Marcus said quickly, moving to my bedside with a limp I didn't remember him having before. His hands were wrapped in bandages that leaked red at the edges, and I remembered with a sick lurch how Morgana's magic had burned him when he'd tried to restrain Felix's possessed body. "He's in the next room. Been unconscious for 3 days. Same as you. Healers are working on him too." 3 days. I'd been gone for 3 days, floating in that void between life and death while my body tried to decide if it wanted to keep functioning. And Felix had been there too, separated from me by a thin wall and the weight of everything that had happened between us. "I need to see him." I tried to sit up, and 6 different hands pressed me back down with varying degrees of gentleness. Pain exploded through my chest, and I tasted blood on my tongue, felt something warm and wet seeping through the bandages that wrapped my torso. "You'll tear the stitches," one of the Fae healers said sharply, her fingers glowing as she pressed them against my wound. "The blade pierced your left lung and nicked your heart. You should be dead, Your Majesty. The only reason you're not is because your wolf refused to let you go. But if you keep moving, even she won't be able to save you." I forced myself to lie still, even though every cell in my body was screaming at me to go to Felix, to see with my own eyes that he was breathing, that he'd survived, that we'd both somehow cheated death together. Through the bond, I could feel him dimly, like trying to hear music through water. He was there. He was alive. But something was wrong with the connection between us, something torn or damaged that made it hurt to reach for him. "What happened after I fell?" I asked Marcus, watching his face carefully. "How many did we lose?" His expression went even more grim. 12 dead, 23 wounded badly enough they might not recover. The castle's eastern wing collapsed. The sacred grove is a crater. Duke Aldrich lost an eye. Lady Helena has burns across 40% of her body. He paused, and I saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "It was a massacre, Freya. If you hadn't broken that crystal when you did, we'd all be dead." "The council?" I already knew the answer from the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. "They want Felix's head." Marcus's voice was flat, carefully neutral. "They're calling it treason. Attempted regicide. Mass murder. Doesn't matter that he was possessed. Doesn't matter that he fought her. 12 pack members are dead, and someone has to answer for it. He's innocent." The words came out fierce despite my weakness. Morgana used him. She raised him specifically to be a weapon against me. He was a victim in this just as much as... "I know." Marcus cut me off gently. "I was there. I saw him fighting her control. I saw what it cost him to break through long enough to tell you about the crystal." He rubbed his ruined hands together absently, wincing at the pain. "But the council doesn't care about intentions. They care about results, and the result is 12 dead wolves and a kingdom that nearly fell." I wanted to argue more, wanted to rage against the injustice of punishing someone for crimes committed while they were possessed. But exhaustion was pulling at me like a riptide, and the healers were exchanging worried glances, their magic intensifying as they tried to keep me stable. I let my eyes drift closed, just for a moment, and heard Marcus's voice from very far away. "Sleep, Your Majesty. We'll keep watch over both of you. I promise." I woke again to darkness and the sound of someone crying. Not me. My eyes were dry, my throat raw but not from tears. The sound was coming from the next room, through the thin wall that separated my bed from Felix's, and I recognized his voice even broken by sobs. He was awake, he was conscious, and he was destroying himself with guilt. I could feel it through the bond, could taste his self-loathing like ash on my tongue. "Felix," I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me through the wall. I pressed my hand against the plaster, wishing I could reach through, wishing I could take away even a fraction of his pain. But the bond was still damaged, still stuttering when I tried to send comfort through it, and all I could do was lie there and listen to him fall apart. Days passed in a haze of healing, and visitors I didn't want. Helena came first, her face wrapped in bandages that covered the burns, her eyes hard as flint when she looked at me. "The trial is set for tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Felix Ashford stands accused of treason and murder. The council expects your testimony, Your Majesty." "He was innocent," I said, for what felt like the 100th time. "Possessed. Morgana controlled him. 12 families have lost loved ones. They deserve justice. They deserve the truth. And the truth is that Felix is as much a victim as anyone else who died that night." She studied me for a long moment, and I saw something almost like pity in her expression. "You love him. Even after everything, you still love him." "Of course I love him. He's my mate. Your mate nearly killed you. Morgana nearly killed me. Felix saved me by fighting through her control long enough to tell me how to stop her." I met her gaze without flinching, even though it cost me. "If you're going to execute someone for what happened, you'll have to execute me too. Because I'm the one who brought him into the castle. I'm the one who insisted on the bonding. I'm the one whose choice led to all of this." Helena left without another word, and I was alone again with my pain and the sound of Felix crying through the wall, and a future that looked bleaker with every passing hour. When they finally let me see him, a week had passed since the night everything shattered. I could walk now, slowly and with assistance, leaning heavily on a cane that had belonged to my father. The wound in my chest was healing, the healers said, but it would scar, and I would never again have the full lung capacity I'd once enjoyed. A small price for surviving, they told me, as if breathing with half your capacity was no great sacrifice for a queen who might need to shift forms and fight at any moment. Felix was sitting on the edge of his bed when the guards escorted me in, his wrists shackled with blessed silver that prevented shifting and dampened magic. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 7 days. Dark circles under his eyes, his face gaunt from refusing food, his beautiful hands trembling where they rested in his lap. When he saw me, he tried to stand, but the chains prevented it, and he made a sound like a wounded animal before collapsing back down. "Freya," he whispered, and my name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. "You're alive. They told me you were alive, but I didn't believe them. I thought they were just saying it to keep me from—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought I'd killed you. I'm hard to kill." I dismissed the guards with a gesture, waited until the door closed behind them before moving slowly across the room to stand in front of him. This close, I could see the evidence of his suffering. Scratches on his arms where he'd clawed at himself, trying to purge Morgana's taint from his skin. A split lip where he'd bitten through during nightmares. The way he wouldn't meet my eyes, couldn't look at me, like the sight of me caused him physical pain. "Look at me," I commanded softly, and after a long moment, he obeyed. His eyes were still that perfect blue, no shadow of possession remaining, but they were full of such anguish that I had to steel myself not to look away. "It wasn't you. You know that, don't you? What happened? The people who died, the destruction. None of that was you. I was the weapon." His voice was hoarse from disuse and screaming. "She shaped me for 20 years, and I let her. I believed her lies. I came here with every intention of killing you, and if I'd been stronger, If I'd fought her from the beginning instead of falling in love with you, then we both would have died differently, I interrupted. Don't you see? Falling in love with me is what saved us. Your love is what gave you the strength to fight through her control. Your love is what made you tell me about the crystal. Without that, she would have won. He shook his head, and I saw tears tracking down his face. 12 people are dead because of me. 12 families destroyed. How do I live with that? How do I wake up every day knowing that my hands— He looked down at his shackled wrists, and I saw revulsion in his expression. These hands killed them. I felt their lives end. I was conscious the whole time, trapped inside my own body, watching myself murder people I'd been training with, serving beside, and I couldn't stop it. I knelt in front of him, ignoring the screaming protest from my healing chest, and took his shackled hands in mine. They were cold and rough and trembling, and I held them gently, remembering the first time we'd touched, the electricity that had passed between us, the certainty that this man was mine in every way that mattered. I know, I said quietly. I know you were conscious. I felt you through the bond, fighting her every second. I felt your horror and your guilt and your desperate attempts to break free. You didn't fail, Felix. You didn't lose. You won by surviving long enough to tell me the truth. I don't deserve your forgiveness. His voice broke on the last word. I don't deserve anything but execution. Maybe that would be better. Maybe if they just ended it, I could finally stop seeing their faces, stop hearing them scream. Don't. I gripped his hands tighter, hard enough that the silver chains bit into both our skin. Don't you dare give up. Don't you dare let her win by destroying yourself. She's gone. Her soul disintegrated when that crystal broke. The only way she can still hurt us is if we let her. The council is going to execute me anyway. The trial is tomorrow. There's no defense for what I did. There's the truth, that you were possessed, that you fought back, that you were a child when Morgana stole you, that you were groomed and manipulated and used as a weapon against your will. The truth doesn't bring back the dead. He looked at me finally, really looked at me, and I saw acceptance in his eyes. Acceptance of death, of punishment, of an ending he thought he deserved. I'm ready, Freya. I've been ready since the moment I woke up and remembered what I'd done. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Promise me you'll find someone else. Someone worthy. Someone who won't bring death and destruction into your life. Promise me you'll be happy. The rage that filled me was clean and bright and gave me the strength to stand despite the pain. I pulled away from him and paced the small room, my cane tapping sharp counterpoint to my words. You want me to promise I'll forget you? That I'll let you die and move on like you meant nothing? That I'll break the mate bond and pretend the moon goddess made a mistake when she chose you for me? Yes, his voice was firm, because loving me cost you everything. Your castle, your people, nearly your life. If I were a better man, I would have resisted her from the start. I would have died before letting her use me to hurt you. If you were anyone other than exactly who you are, I wouldn't love you. I stopped pacing and faced him, letting him see every ounce of fury and love and determination in my expression. You're not perfect, Felix. You were broken and manipulated and forced into an impossible situation. But you fought, even when it seemed hopeless. Even when every instinct Morgana had programmed into you said to give up and let her win. You fought. That's who you are. Not her weapon. Not her creature. A man who fights. Fighting doesn't make me innocent. No, but it makes you worth saving. The trial was held the next morning in what remained of the throne room, hastily cleared of rubble and reorganized to hold the families of the dead and the survivors who'd fought in the grove. I sat on my throne with my back straight and my crown heavy on my head and my chest screaming with every breath, watching as they brought Felix in, shackled and flanked by guards. He walked with his head down, his shoulders hunched, already condemned in his own mind before any verdict was spoken. The evidence was presented. Witness testimony from those who'd seen Felix's possessed body killing guards, destroying the castle, attempting to murder me. The truth about Morgana was included, her past, her exile, her crimes, but it was presented almost as an afterthought, a footnote to the main accusation. Felix Ashford, Beta Commoner, had been the weapon that nearly destroyed the Blood Moon Pack. Someone had to pay. Grayson stood to deliver the council's recommendation. While we acknowledge that Felix Ashford was possessed by Morgana's vengeful spirit, we cannot ignore the facts. 12 of our pack members are dead. Our castle is half destroyed. Our queen nearly died. Pack law is clear on this matter. Treason carries only one punishment. Death, Lady Helena confirmed, her bandaged face impassive. We recommend immediate execution." The families of the dead shouted their agreement, grief and rage making their voices sharp. I sat on my throne and felt the weight of their expectations, the pressure of precedent and pack law, and the need for someone to blame, someone to punish, someone whose death might make the pain of loss slightly more bearable. "No," I said, and my voice cut through the noise like a blade. "I reject your recommendation." Silence. Shocked, angry silence. Grayson's face went red, and Helena stood from her seat with her fists clenched. "Your Majesty," Grayson began carefully, "we understand that you have feelings for the accused, but your personal attachment cannot override pack law." "My personal attachment," I repeated, standing slowly despite the way it made my vision swim. "You mean my mate bond? The sacred connection chosen by the moon goddess herself? That personal attachment? The mate bond can be broken," Helena said quietly. "It's been done before in extreme circumstances. We have rituals. I won't break it." I descended the steps from my dais, moving toward Felix where he knelt in the center of the room. Every eye tracked my progress. Dozens of wolves watching their queen choose between justice and mercy, between what the law demanded and what her heart required. "I won't break it because Felix Ashford is not guilty of the crimes you're accusing him of." "He killed 12 pack members," Marcus said, and I heard the pain in his voice. "I was there, Freya. I saw him do it." "You saw Morgana do it using his body as a weapon. Felix was possessed, controlled, as much a prisoner as if she'd locked him in a cell." I reached Felix and placed my hand on his head, a gesture of protection, and claim that was as old as pack law itself. "Morgana stole him when he was an infant. She spent 20 years programming him, filling his head with lies, making him into a weapon against me. He never had a choice in any of this. And when the moment came, when she was using him to kill me, he fought through her control long enough to give me the information I needed to stop her. He saved us all, and you want to execute him for it? The law. I am the law." My voice rang out with alpha command, and I felt my wolf surge behind my words, felt the power of my bloodline making the air itself vibrate. "I am Alpha Queen of the Blood Moon Pack, and I say Felix Ashford is innocent of these charges. But I also recognize that pack justice must be served, that the dead must be honored, that punishment must be meted out for what happened." I turned to Felix, who was staring up at me with confusion and hope and fear all mixed together. "Felix Ashford, I'm sentencing you to exile. You'll be sent to the monastery on the eastern border, where you'll study with the monks and learn to control the magic Morgana taught you. You'll live there for as long as it takes for you to heal, to grow, to become the man you were meant to be before she twisted you. And when that time comes, if you choose to return, you'll petition me for service to the pack, not as my mate, not with any promises or expectations, just as a man who wants to serve and atone." "Your Majesty," Grayson began, but I cut him off with a look. "This is my decision as Alpha. Challenge it, and you challenge me. I've given you all 7 years of perfect service. I've led us through war and famine and prosperity. I've earned the right to show mercy when I choose to, and I choose to show it now." No one spoke. No one moved. Felix was crying again, silent tears tracking down his face as he stared at me with something like worship in his eyes. And slowly, one by one, the pack members began to nod, some reluctantly, some with anger still burning in their expressions. But they nodded, because I was their queen, and they had sworn to follow me, and even in this, even when they disagreed, they would honor that oath. I helped Felix to his feet, and led him from the throne room, leaving the council and the families and the weight of judgment behind us. We walked slowly through the damaged corridors of the castle until we reached the eastern courtyard, where a cart waited to take him away. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed too beautiful for such a devastating moment. "How long?" he asked quietly, and I knew what he meant. How long until he could come back? How long until I would forgive him? How long until we could have what Morgana had stolen from us? "As long as it takes," I answered honestly, "for you to heal, for me to rebuild, for trust to grow again from the ashes of what she destroyed. Will you wait?" The question was small, vulnerable, nothing like the confident man who'd first played piano in my throne room all those weeks ago. I cupped his face in my hands, memorizing the feel of him, the way his eyes reflected the dawn light, the proof that we'd both survived when we shouldn't have. "The mate bond is still there. Damaged, yes. Broken in places. But there, and mate bonds don't lie, Felix. They can't lie. The moon goddess chose you for me for a reason. Maybe it was so we could teach each other about forgiveness. Maybe it was so we could learn that love isn't just the easy moments, but the hard ones too. Maybe it was just because, despite everything, you make me feel more alive than I've felt since my parents died. So yes, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to believe you're worthy of being waited for. He kissed me then, desperate and gentle, and tasting of salt from both our tears, and I kissed him back like it was goodbye and hello and everything in between. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered 4 words that I would carry with me through the long months ahead. I'll come back worthy. The year that followed was the hardest of my life, and I'd buried both my parents before my 20th birthday. I threw myself into rebuilding with a fervor that worried my council, working from dawn until I collapsed from exhaustion, overseeing every aspect of the castle's reconstruction. I created programs for wolves who'd been victims of magical coercion, changed laws about possession and culpability, worked with Helena to establish a network of support for those dealing with trauma. I became a better queen through suffering, and I hated every moment of it. The mate bond was there constantly, a dull ache at the back of my consciousness that reminded me Felix existed somewhere beyond my borders, growing stronger without me. He sent letters, dozens of them, hundreds, chronicles of his progress, his studies, his slowly healing mind. I read every single one and never responded, because I knew that if I wrote back, if I opened that door even a crack, I would beg him to come home before he was ready, before either of us was ready, and we'd just break all over again. Instead, I focused on my pack, on justice and mercy, on becoming the kind of queen who could hold both in balance. I sat with the families of the dead and listened to their grief. I worked with Marcus, whose hands would never fully heal, to train a new generation of guards who would be ready if dark magic ever threatened us again. I spent hours with Father Benedict, discussing forgiveness and redemption, and whether love could ever really conquer the kind of evil Morgana had embodied. The crescent moon mark on my shoulder, my birthmark that proclaimed my connection to the moon goddess, began to glow on the first day of every month, silver light pulsing from beneath my skin. The priestesses said it was a sign that my mate was alive and thinking of me, that the bond was healing despite the distance. I chose to believe them, because the alternative was unbearable. 1 year to the day after Felix had left, I was holding court when the doors to the throne room opened, and a figure walked in that made my heart stop. He was taller somehow, or maybe he just carried himself differently, shoulders back and head high, in a way the broken man I'd exiled never could have managed. His hair was longer, tied back with a simple cord, and he wore the robes of the monastery rather than noble finery. But his eyes were still that perfect blue, clear and bright, and full of purpose, and when they met mine across the crowded room, I felt the mate bond flare to life between us, like someone had poured fuel on dying embers. He walked toward my throne with steady steps, and the court fell silent, everyone remembering the last time they'd seen this man, the blood and destruction he'd brought. But there was no shadow in his eyes now, no hint of possession or darkness, just a man who'd spent a year becoming whole again. He knelt at the base of my dais, not in defeat, but in respect, and when he spoke, his voice was strong and clear. Your Majesty, I have returned to petition for service to the Blood Moon Pack. I come bearing recommendations from the monastery elders, proof of my training, and a lifetime of dedication to atone for the harm caused by the woman who made me her weapon. I'm not asking for my place at your side. I'm not asking for forgiveness I haven't earned. I'm only asking for the chance to serve, to prove every day that I'm more than what she tried to make me, that I can be worthy of the pack that showed me mercy when I deserved none. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man who'd fought a witch's conditioning from the time he was old enough to understand what was happening to him. I saw the man who'd fallen in love with me, despite every instinct telling him I was the enemy. I saw the man who'd broken through possession to save my life, and I saw the man who'd spent a year in exile becoming someone he could live with, someone who could look at himself in the mirror without flinching. I stood from my throne and descended the steps, my movement easier now, the wound in my chest, nothing but a scar and a memory. The court held its collective breath as I stopped in front of him, as I reached down and placed my hand under his chin, tilting his face up so he had to meet my eyes. Felix Ashford, I said formally, loudly enough for everyone to hear. The council has reviewed your petition. I felt him tense, preparing for rejection, for more punishment, for anything but what I was about to give him. Your exile is ended. Your title is restored. I smiled then, letting him see everything I felt, all the love and hope and cautious joy that had been building in my chest. Welcome home, my mate. The sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and then he was standing and I was in his arms, and we were both crying and the court was erupting into mixed reactions of approval and outrage and confusion. But I didn't care what they thought. I didn't care about anything except the feeling of his heart beating against mine, the mate bond singing between us stronger than ever, the proof that we'd survived the worst and come out the other side not broken, but transformed. We have work to do, I whispered against his chest. Both of us, together, building something real, something honest, something Morgana's hate could never touch. I'm ready, he whispered back. I've been ready for a year. 6 months later, I stood in our bedroom, the one we'd had rebuilt with wards and protections and windows that let in more light than the old room ever had, and stared down at the pregnancy test in my shaking hands. 2 lines, positive. I was pregnant with Felix's child, carrying the next generation of the Blood Moon line, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry or scream. Felix found me there, frozen and pale, and read my expression immediately. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Is it? His eyes dropped to the test in my hands, and he went very still. Oh, I'm pregnant, I said, stating the obvious because I couldn't think of anything else to say. We're going to have a baby. That's... He moved toward me slowly, like I might bolt if he came too fast. That's good, isn't it? We've talked about children. We've said we wanted... What if I'm not ready? The words burst out of me in a rush, all my fears and doubts tumbling free. What if I can't protect them? What if someone comes after us again? What if you're the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I've ever known? Felix interrupted gently, taking the test from my hands and setting it aside so he could pull me into his arms. What if you're exactly the mother this child needs? What if we raise them together, teaching them about strength and forgiveness, and how love can survive even the darkest magic? What if you're not ready? I whispered against his chest. After everything, after Morgana, after... I'm not her, he said firmly, tilting my face up so I had to meet his eyes. I'll never be her. I'm the man who chose love over vengeance. I'm the man who fought through possession because you gave me something worth fighting for. I'm the man who spent a year learning to forgive himself so he could be worthy of you. And now, I get to be a father, and that terrifies me, but it also fills me with more joy than I thought possible. We're going to be okay, I said, trying to convince both of us. We're going to raise this child in a world where pack members support each other, where possession victims are treated with compassion, where love is stronger than hate. We're going to be better than what came before. We already are, Felix said, and he placed his hand on my still flat stomach with a reverence that made tears spring to my eyes. We already are. That night, we lay in bed with moonlight streaming through our windows and Felix's hand on my belly, and the future stretching ahead of us uncertain and beautiful and ours. I thought about everything we'd been through, all the pain and blood and near death, all the choices that had led us to this moment. I thought about the mate bond humming between us, gold and unbreakable now, fully healed. I thought about the child growing inside me, half of each of us, proof that love could create as powerfully as hate could destroy. They say an alpha queen should never lower herself to love a beta servant. They said choosing a commoner would destroy my bloodline's legacy. They were wrong. Loving Felix didn't make me weak. It made me strong enough to show mercy when the law demanded vengeance. It made me brave enough to forgive when hatred would have been easier. It made me wise enough to understand that true power isn't about ruling through fear, but leading through compassion. As I felt our child kick for the first time, just the faintest flutter beneath Felix's hand, I knew with absolute certainty that loving him was the bravest thing I'd ever done, and being loved by him, despite everything, made me not just a queen, but finally, completely whole.